Alright, so the next and probably most important thing I want to show you guys how to do is how to insert a component into a board. So you'll have your circuit board where we just tinned earlier, or I did, and you can see the parts that I did are silver and the parts that aren't are still copper colored. You guys will obviously do the whole thing in one clean swipe. I was just kind of demonstrating, so that's why it's not all done. But the next thing you want to do is insert your components in. So right here I got a resistor. That's going to be the first things you want to put in because they are the easiest to put in because you can't mess them up by burning them out by using too much heat. They can tolerate a lot of heat, whereas some of the other stuff, if you put that soldering iron on it for too long, it's going to burn it up on the inside and it won't work anymore. Resistors can handle a lot of heat. So starting out with the resistor. But when you want to put like a resistor in your board, you don't want to just kind of insert it like this, where you wanted to put it in this hole and this hole. You're not just going to insert it in through these two holes, bend the leads and see if I can get it in here real quick. Push it in down like that. You don't want to insert it like that. What you want to do is actually put it so that the component is going to be on the top of the board, just like this. Alright? So down here, this is the bottom of the board. This is where we're going to do all of the soldering and have all the tracks and pads and do all the tinning. But the actual components, all the actual components will sit onto the top of the board just like this. So you see right here, I already did 2 resistors and they're sitting on the top of the board. So you're going to want to insert it so that everything is on top. So if I wanted to put it in these 2 holes, I'd have to find them on the bottom, flip it over and know that, okay, it's right there, and then line it up and stick both my leads down through. Alright? You could solder it just like this, where it's sitting up really high, but the goal is to have it down flat against the board like this. That way, if it is up like this, where it's higher, it could get bent, pushed around, eventually break off. It's just not a good idea to have it this high. It could, if there's something right next to it, like if there's something coming out of that hole, if it was up this high as well, they could touch each other and end up shorting the circuit out. So the goal is to push it down in as far as it will go, just like that. Okay? So once you have it in position, you can put it down here, and we'll clamp it into position. Just like that. Let me zoom in here really quick. Alright, so right there we have our 2 leads coming out of the board. You might have to bend them a little bit so that way it doesn't want to slide right out and fall to the ground underneath it. So if you want to bend these to the side or whatever it takes to make sure they don't pop out, that'd be a good idea. But once you do that, you want to grab your soldering iron, and first thing you want to do is make sure you clean it off. So you guys stick it in a sponge and make sure that that tip is nice and clean as we possibly can make it. And you should be able to tell by, once again, how nice and clean and shiny it is. But once you have a nice clean tip, you're going to want to tin the tip again. So just like when we put a little bit of solder on that tip and then pushed it all along this and it tinned all that, we're going to do the same thing where we just put a little piece of solder on here and it will smoke a little bit, but we just want to make sure we have a little bit of solder on there. It helps the flow of the solder going from this down to the pad when we go to solder. So you want to have a little bit on your tip. So once you do that, the next thing you want to do is you're going to take your soldering iron and come in at a 45-degree angle. So something looking right about like this, and you're going to put it down against the pad. So the pad's that's that circle right there. But you're going to want to come in and put it and sit it on that pad so that pad heats up. Then you're going to take your piece of solder right here and come in on the other side and hit it onto that pad, and it's going to be really hot, so it's going to start to melt. So you don't want to just stick this into this and then blob it onto there. You want to stick this down on one side, this on the other side, and you're going to insert it. And as you do this, you will see it slowly start to fill in that pad. And once you don't see the hole anymore, you're going to slowly drag it up. Alright, so right now, I didn't put enough solder on it. So I'm going to go back down in again and insert enough until I can now drag it up And if we look at that, it has this kind of nice shape where it looks almost like a Hershey Kiss, where it starts off nice and flat at the bottom and slowly works its way up to a point. That's what we're looking for. That's a good shape that we want to achieve. Another way to tell if you did a good joint is if it is shiny or not. If it's shiny, that means it is a good joint. If it has this faded look to it, that means you probably put too much solder or put it on for too long or just made some other mistakes. Also, you don't want to see any black residue in your solder joint. So if you see I have just a little bit of it right here in the front of it, that's because I redid the solder joint, did it twice. It added a little bit of residue. So you want to try to do it in one shot if you can. It'll make things a lot nicer. But let me go here and do the other side because we want to solder both parts of the component in. Once again, I'm putting it down 45-degree angle against the pad, heating it up, and then slowly inserting the solder in until I see it cover up that hole. And then we're going to drag it up the lead until we have a nice Hershey Kiss shape. You're not going to want to touch these leads until like at least 10 seconds after you do it because they absorb a lot of heat and they get really hot. So if you were to try to touch this right now, it will probably burn you, and we do not want to do that. So once you do that, you will clean off the tip of your point again, stick it in here, and the final step is once you're 100% sure that's where it's supposed to be, that component went into those correct 2 holes, you're going to want to cut off these extra leads right here because they're just going to get in the way of everything else. So we don't want that. So you're going to take your diagonal cutters and you're going to come in and you're going to try to go to low to the board as possible, and then you're going to snip it and take it right off. That way these things don't stab anyone, get in the way, short out the circuit, whatever it takes. But as you can see then, we now have 3. It doesn't matter if it's that short or if you see the ones in the back here, these are trimmed really short. All of those will work as long as they're not really long and hanging out of the place. But once we got that, we now have 3 whole components that are all soldered into place right here that will do the trick just right. But once again, you want to get that 45-degree angle, stick the soldering tip on one side, the solder on the other side, insert it onto the pad so it starts to melt. Once it covers up that hole, drag the soldering tip up the lead, and then you should have yourself a nice soldering joint. And that's what we're looking for.